screen too. No, one stop recording.
Oh, good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today, for joining National Capacity and CNHA at, for the release of the Asian American and Pacific Islander Anti-Displacement Strategies report launch. We're very excited to have you all here today, and excited to be here with our partners, the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement and National Low Income Housing Coalition. My name is Seema Agnani. I'm the Director of Policy with National Capacity. Also, welcome to those who are on the webcast. We have almost 100 people joining us via the web today. So we're very excited to have you joining us as well. If you have comments or questions, you can post them on the webcast itself, or you can send us a message via our #OurNeighborhood. So feel free to participate with us that way. So to get us started this morning, we wanted to have Paul Keeley, the Chief Operating Officer from the National Low Income Housing Coalition, share a few words.
Thank you, Seema. So I am Paul Keeley, Chief Operating Officer here at the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and the National Low Income Housing Coalition, NLIHC for short, is dedicated to achieving socially just public policies that ensure that the lowest income people in the country have decent, affordable homes. And it's an absolute pleasure to be able to host at our offices the release of this really important report that we had nothing to do with. I should just point that out. For those of you who are taking this by webcast, just so that you know, we're in a room with about, I would say, another 30 people. So this is extremely well attended, and it should be, because this is an incredibly important report, spearheaded by CNHA, sorry about that, and National Capacity. And the CNHA is represented by its founder and policy chair, as I understand that, Robin Danner, and National Capacity, you'll hear in a moment from Lisa Hasegawa, who is the Executive Director of National Capacity, and full disclosure, is also on the Board of Directors of the National Low Income Housing Coalition. So welcome to all of you. Special welcome also to the HUD Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Harriet Trigoni, we'll hear from shortly, and from our friends at the Right to City and Homes for All. As I mentioned, NLIHC, the National Low Income Housing Coalition, is a national organization dedicated to affordable housing for extremely low income families and individuals. And what we do is research, policy advocacy, communications, and organizing to try to shed light on the dramatic, serious lack of affordable housing in our country, particularly for those with the lowest incomes. To shed light on it, to bring it to the attention of the public, and to try to influence public policy so that that is addressed. Currently, one of the greatest drivers of homelessness and housing poverty in the United States is the displacement of people from extremely high-cost areas. That's the focus of this report. It is a phenomenal report. I'll be coming back later to share some perspectives on it, but it is extremely well written, extremely well researched. So it's a great pleasure for NLIHC to host at our offices the release of this report. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I wanted to also thank all of the other partners that are in the room who joined us. We had a great congressional roundtable yesterday with Right to the City and the Homes for All campaign. So I want to thank them for joining us again today. And you'll hear from some other partners who will be responding to our report later as well. Thank you for being here. And a lot of our membership is on the webcast, so we want to welcome you. We're really excited to have you here. Our Community in the Capital Fellows are also joining us in the room today. This is part of the closing of their fellowship and have really been a key part of developing national capacities policy agenda over this past year. So wanted to just acknowledge everyone in the room. So with that, I'm going to bring up Lisa Hasegawa, Executive Director, and Robin Danner, Policy Chair of the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lisa Hasegawa with the National Coalition for Asian Pacific American Community Development, National Capacity. And it's wonderful to be here this morning to launch this report. We have done a number of reports through the years, but this one is particularly near and dear to my heart. This issue of displacement and gentrification that are impacting low-income communities and communities of color has been a theme. It was the impetus for national capacity being founded over 15 years ago when the Chinatowns actually came together. The leadership of a lot of the Chinatowns around the country came together to really talk about the common forces that were really having very negative impacts in communities in Chinatowns. When they founded the national organization, they decided that we really needed an entity that was going to look at not only Chinatowns and the Chinese community, but Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders and Native Hawaiians. And so I'm particularly also proud that this report is in partnership with our national partner that we've been working with from the beginning days of national capacity, the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement. So this was, a labor of love and something that I think is really reflective of the drivers for the work that national capacity members do every day to make sure that we have healthy, thriving, and just neighborhoods. Our new strategic plan is around racial justice. We have been, we put out a report a few years ago with looking at the spotlight of the growing poverty in our communities. And we know that we cannot really affect the change that needs to happen at the national level without strong partners and without a broader coalition of people of color and advocates who care about low-income communities. So it is in that spirit that we launched this report and that we are here today to talk about what's happening in neighborhoods around the country.
Good morning, and for those of you back home in Hawaii and the larger Pacific region, I know it's like 3 or 4 in the morning, so bravo to you if you're on
you can watch it later.
If you're on this webcast. Thank you, Lisa. On behalf of the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement, I want to recognize capacity for partnering with a Native Hawaiian national organization, perhaps not as well known except for back home. Similar to Capacity's founding about 16 years ago, Native Hawaiian organizations from every walk of life came together to found the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement so that we could work together on our issues. I'd like to say aloha on behalf of Michelle Kauhane, who is the CEO of the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement. She was unable to be here. I want to put somewhat in context why CNHA is such a strong partner with Capacity. There are many, many AAPI national organizations around the country. I have found as a PI, as a Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander, that Capacity has been one of the more progressive and focused and recognizing the similarities that Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders have with the Asian American community, but also the differences and the uniqueness. And I found Lisa and Capacity to be open to understanding those differences and lifting them up through CNHA. For example, you'll find in this displacement report that we all share the challenges. What's really cool about this report, and I think what we are trying to do together, is to lay out what the solutions are. We're not just about these are problems. Our communities have the solutions to our challenges, and it's incumbent upon us to bring those solutions forward and to work with, not against, policymakers and other partners to make sure that those solutions happen. It's not enough to just point out what ails us. We have the solutions and we need to help each other lift up those voices. And I think that's what this report does. There are CNHA members that are sharing There are solutions in this report. There are capacity members in this report that are doing good work and perhaps do not often have the voice or the shining of those solutions. We need to replicate, we need to duplicate all of these items. From a native wine perspective, while we share all of these commonalities in solutions and challenges, we also have unique challenges and solutions. And that is because almost 100 years ago, as an Aboriginal or as an original native peoples of our country, the U.S. Congress established the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, which is essentially a federal land trust program. And as a result, access to capital and implementing solutions that might commonly be known around the country, it's much, much tougher. That doesn't mean that we can't solve them, we can, but they do have a slight paradigm shift. And so I'm really happy, and I want to thank Lisa for enabling the council to bring forward to our policymakers across the Congress and the Senate those unique solutions that are completely achievable.
And we're just really excited with this report. We hope to start a national conversation about the policies and the solutions to really address the growing displacement that is of heightened concern, I think, around the country for many communities. So with that, we have a very special guest with us, and I'm going to bring Seema back up to introduce her. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm very pleased to introduce Harriet Tregoning. She's the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Office of Community Planning and Development at HUD. She is also one of the highest ranking Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders within HUD, and brings a wealth of knowledge through her experience on the city, state, and local level that she's had throughout the years. So we're really excited to have you here and joining our conversation here.
Seema, thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I want to acknowledge, Seema, your leadership as the Director of Policy and Civic Engagement at the national capacity. Lisa Hasagawa, thank you so much for your role in producing this amazing report, and Robin Danner at the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement. It's really a pleasure to be here at this convening with you. Thanks to Paul Keeley for hosting us in a really wonderful facility. We really appreciate that. And your report really couldn't be more timely and more, I think, aligned with a lot of the efforts that HUD is really engaged in. Neighborhood change isn't a new phenomenon. The term gentrification was coined by a British sociologist, Ruth Glass, in 1964, more than 50 years ago. And over the past 50 years, there's been a lot of public and academic discourse on the topic, a lot of it very heated. It shouldn't come as any surprise about the emotions that change in your neighborhood evokes. These are people's homes and communities, and the possibility that longtime residents who often really endured through very difficult times in their communities, that they could be displaced as the community finally improves economically or altered so as to be unrecognizable to those residents, raise incredibly important equity questions. And I think if you look at today, there's been an increasing amount of research on the prevalence of gentrification, on its causes and its consequences, even debates on how to define it. I think a dictionary definition of gentrification not only considers the income gains of the neighborhood or the community, and those were some of the things that you considered in your report, but also presumes two other phenomena: the displacement of the original low-income residents and usually large-scale racial change as well. So these phenomena are at the heart of why the term is so emotionally charged, and why we at HUD in particular and in communities around the nation have a stake in avoiding or minimizing those outcomes. So this report really, like I say, is incredibly timely. And what it really demonstrates is that, in the course of increasingly frequent neighborhood change, our neighborhoods report really raises the possibility that displacement and this wholesale racial change are anything but inevitable. And that with the right intentional actions, we can harness some of the benefits of economic gains in low-income communities without those high-cost outcomes. And I think that's really what we all want. Low-income AAPIs are disproportionately concentrated in the hottest and most expensive markets, places like New York City, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Honolulu. Therefore, the threat of displacement is really huge for this group. The ability to avoid displacement of original residents, at least in many areas experiencing gains, creates the potential that economically improving neighborhoods could actually remain more diverse, economically and racially. The Our Neighborhoods report really highlights the tremendous range of approaches and strategies that local activists are promoting, and ultimately that local governments are moving to adopt. And I think that is tremendous, and I applaud your efforts, because that's what we really need, to accelerate the learning and the pace of change in terms of adopting policies that enable longtime residents to be part of the changes happening in their communities, to exercise some control, to make sure that the benefit of new investment accrue to those longtime residents and not just to newcomers. I wanted to mention some efforts that are going on at HUD, including something that's, I think, very closely aligned with what this report really represents. Secretary Julian Castro, as you know, is a former local official, a former mayor. And he has kind of an irrepressible faith in the power of mayors, both to compete tremendously with each other, to be the best city, but also to be incredibly generous and open-handed with their practices and their successes and failures, so that learning among mayors can be really, really powerful. He has started an effort called Prosperity Playbook. A very close relationship with 5 regions around the country: San Francisco, Denver, Atlanta, Kansas City, and the Twin Cities. Several of these places are featured in your report, where first and foremost the focus is on economic mobility and expanding the landscape of opportunity. These are all places that have significant racial and ethnic concentrations of poverty that are often, span many generations in the same locale. So looking to create more opportunity in those places, and working at the scale of the region to try to do that. As you know, HUD's mission is to create strong, sustainable, inclusive communities and quality affordable housing for all, quality affordable housing for everyone. Investing in a two-pronged strategy, right? Both investing in places and in policies to increase access to opportunity. We're investing millions of dollars in disadvantaged communities, but where we succeed or where other forces are driving community change, we still need to do better in capturing those gains and retaining diversity so that the original residents can benefit. So that's one of the real challenges that we are trying to address today. How do we ensure more meaningful, sustainable integration across the country to maximize the downside of that community change and get those benefits to accrue to more folks? And one of the main ways that we're doing this with Prosperity Playbook is to come up literally with a set of best practices that we can share. And in fact, now that the embargo is lifted, as soon as I leave here, I'm going to be sending this document to our partners, and we're going to definitely very lovingly borrow many of the ideas that you've proposed here and try to get those disseminated very widely, because I think they represent some real successes on the ground. At HUD, we're focused on a number of strategies, several of which are highlighted in your Our Neighborhoods report. Preserving and producing more affordable housing through initiatives like the Rental Assistance Demonstration Project, or RAD, and looking at new models like accessory dwelling units, which involves working with local governments to make sure they have the zoning to support it, but also perhaps using HUD funds like CDBG to finance the conversion of those ADUs. Working with partners in transportation, especially in hot markets, around new transit-oriented development to make sure it's equitable. We've done that through grants we've given in Seattle and Minneapolis, as referenced in your report. In fact, in 2010 and 2011, we awarded more than 140 sustainable community initiatives planning grants. 74 of them went to whole regions across the country, and they led cross-cutting multi-sector planning processes. And they were also required, the regional grantees, to do a fair housing and equity assessment as part of the final deliverable, to really look at disparities in communities. And those fair housing and equity assessments actually became a pilot for the type of data and analysis that we're requiring with our new regulation on affirmatively furthering fair housing. So the new assessment of fair housing will produce an evaluation of housing choice and barriers in entitlement jurisdictions modeled on that approach. Like the AFH, the Fair Housing and Equity Assessment provided for historical and current analysis of fair housing challenges and includes an assessment of those factors that create or contribute to or perpetuate fair housing issues like land uses, community investments, local policies that either limit or enhance opportunity for different parts of the region. Other strategies are reinforcing the importance of community participation in planning processes, including things like the consolidated plan and that analysis of fair housing, making more data and information available, which we're doing through maps, through tools like CPD Maps and the AFFH data and mapping tools. So there's a real wealth of new data that's available that demonstrate what kind of disparities exist, and when connected with local data, some of these maps are really startling. So I really urge folks to begin to use those tools and do that mapping. And finally, facilitating these critical partnerships among cities and localities facing similar challenges. That's why I think your report is so helpful. You know, whatever the group, whatever the specific issue in the cities, these challenges are nearly universal. And you know, every community can benefit from seeing the successes that the Our Neighborhoods report has really demonstrated. So let me just congratulate you and thank you for bringing such a wealth of successful practices to greater light, and we look forward to a continued dialogue with you about both the issues and the possible solutions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And hopefully you can stick around so for the discussion part of our session.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, great. So now I want to bring up Josh Ishimatsu and Lailan Nguyen, who I also want to recognize both of them, particularly Lailan, for the hard work she really put into pulling this report together. You know, she really put all of her time and efforts into making sure this was really representative of the amazing work that happens on the ground. So congratulations to you as well, and you're going to present some data.
So hi, I'm Josh Ishimatsu, Director of Research and Capacity Building for National Capacity. And I just wanted to do a little bit of setting the data context for some of what we're going to hear in a little bit. So since the foreclosure crisis, you know, this is, you know, in part has caused a lot of people to move from homeownership to renting, but we are in the midst of what the Harvard Joint Center on Housing Studies is calling the strongest decade for rental growth in history, for like ever. And this is both in terms of increasing rents and the number of people who are renting. So one big data point that we want to put out is that you know, housing costs are rising faster. You know, even in this you know, largest decade in history, you know, housing costs are rising faster in the neighborhoods that are featured in this report than in the country overall. And so housing costs for Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders, AAPI, so that's just the abbreviation I'm going to use. It has been 2 to 3 times the growth in housing costs has been 2 to 3 times more than the increase in income growth. So you know, so this is like, you know, we're looking at really like a squeezing of people from higher housing costs. Next slide. Oh, there should be one. There should be one between those. Okay, and like this being squeezed on the housing cost front is also against the backdrop of really growing AAPI economic need. There's huge growing AAPI economic success on one side of our community, but unacknowledged and not really known in the shadow of like this sort of like model minority is that AAPI poverty growth has been higher than for any other racial and economic group. So 50% for AAPIs overall, but within that, Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders poverty growth over the past, basically since the recession has been 71%, total growth of 71%, and this is compared to 22% overall poverty growth, which is not a good thing at all. That's not something that's 22 overall poverty growth for the general population. And this is also, again, with the backdrop of a huge loss of net worth in median Asian American household net worth from the recession. So next slide. And well, I guess just with this final slide that I'm presenting is that we wanted to show something about the diversity of the AAPI community. Lisa talked about, when Lisa talked about the formation of capacity and a lot of Chinatown groups coming together. So with displacement of low-income AAPIs, a lot of like the more visible cases is where there are displacement of low-income tenants within the Chinatowns. Within like these traditional older historic neighborhoods in some of the central cities, and this is a big important part of the report. But we also want to make it clear that the AAPI community is diverse, and that displacement, is how the forms displacement takes within our diverse communities is also diverse, and we have. There's issues from like people in the Pacific Islanders and U.S. territories around climate change and like that we're going to be seeing in the future climate change refugees. As sea level rise. The Southeast Asian community, there's issues of displacement around immigration policy and criminalization of youth. In a Native Hawaiian community, there's issues around the trust land. So there is this current rental crisis, but we also want to make it clear that the AAPI community is diverse and displacement takes many forms within our community.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Lailan Hewen. I'm the Community Development and Organizing Manager for National Capacity. First off, I just want to thank our members who are watching from across the country and who are in this room, who gave us their time as we went across the country and traveled to their neighborhoods to interview them about their best work, their best strategies, what's actually working in our communities to stop displacement. And for touring us around their neighborhoods and actually seeing for ourselves and being able to compare cities and really learn from that experience. So thank you all. I think an important point is that, the data that we've had available that Josh shared is often from 2014. The 2015 data mostly was not available at the time of our report. And so this is really lagging behind what we believe is a much more severe crisis than the data actually shows. And so that's why we went to our members, because our members are the folks on the front lines. They're the ones experiencing these trends first before we ever know the data, before we ever have a report about it. So we really wanted to lift up those voices and say this is what's happening, because we still have naysayers who say that gentrification and displacement is not a problem. And we still have a lot of elected officials who believe that development is the only way. And that, we need to move low-income folks out of the cities. So that's still a struggle, and we just want to lift up those voices. So we wanted to share a little bit of our national analysis from what we've seen. And again, as Lisa said, we're just starting this conversation. We know it's very complex, and so we just want to share what folks are experiencing on the ground. Obviously, tenants and small businesses are often hit the hardest, right? Tenants are experiencing what Right to the City and Homes for All says is the perfect storm for the renter crisis. In many cities, there is not any kind of rent control. Many cities, there's not a lot of just cause eviction policies to prevent unjust eviction. So tenants in some cities are completely able to be displaced without any reason at all, except for profit. And then small businesses is a real concern. As many of you know, the small businesses in our community are the lifeline of our families and of our neighborhoods. And so, pretty much commercial rent control does not exist. We haven't seen many examples that exist out there in this country. And so that is really leading to a heightened displacement of our micro businesses that often have, 1 or 2 to 3, 4 employees, have very small profit margins and are very easy to be displaced, especially when policies preference corporate retail actually in new development. So these are huge problems that we're seeing. 22 million more renters in cities just between 2006 and 2014. We know that the foreclosure crisis really pushed a lot of the homeowners into the rental market and created severe housing shortage in terms of rental housing. We also know that a lot of our younger folks and younger people cannot buy homes anymore because of their severe student debt. Also because many of the younger generations are preferring rental, and so that's creating even more squeeze on the rental market. We also know that landlords and investors in many cities, unfortunately, are taking advantage of the squeeze and are rising, rents to ridiculous rates as much as they can, as much as last So an important point that actually Josh has written about is that we really need to track rental data. In some of the studies that have come out saying gentrification is not a problem, they're just looking at homeowner data, and if we're not looking at rental data, that's a huge problem. So that's in part of our data recommendations. An important point I think also to note is that we often use HUD area median income for assessing affordability and accessibility to affordable units in our cities. And that if you see in the report, we've listed for every single city and neighborhood feature, specifically for the neighborhoods, what are the area median incomes, what are the API median incomes for those neighborhoods. And in every single situation, they're below the county area median incomes, which are used to assess who is able to access affordable housing. And so even affordable housing we've seen, because many of our members are building affordable housing, the most low-income families cannot access them. And this is also affecting access to federal funds, such as CDBG funds, and also Main Streets program funds, because often our neighborhoods are right next to downtowns that have very wealthy folks in them, and so they're not considered low income by their census tracts. And so one of our recommendations is to move the census tracts to really define and reflect what our neighborhoods are. So we also have recommendations to include a poverty overlay for the cities to actually be able to assess who should be able to access and get a better understanding of poverty. So, this is a lot of text, so I'll try to break it down. Just overall, we are seeing cities, a general analysis, that places that do have rent control and just cause eviction are working. And we're really happy to see that Right to the City and Homes for All are leading national campaigns to proliferate more rent control policies and just cause evictions. And policies like inclusionary zoning and housing are being overturned. For example, in Oregon, they just overturned a 17-year ban on inclusionary zoning. And I think Duncan will talk about that in a little bit. But, our long-standing policies that aren't working are being changed right now because of the crisis that we're in. And we need to seize that moment and implement great policies. We're seeing an interesting shift in high income, middle income, and low income families. We're seeing the widening wealth gap, that the numbers of higher income APIs is increasing, that often the number of low income APIs is increasing. Overall, though, we do have a net loss of about 1,500 families overall. But we are seeing a little bit of a declining of the middle income folks actually getting pushed out into the suburbs, often into satellite communities that exist out of the historic districts where our history is. And so that's a pretty interesting trend that we've been seeing. It also shows that there's not enough really workforce housing in a lot of our cities as well. And that really the most vulnerable folks are the ones who are getting displaced in terms of folks on Section 8 and homeless folks who have very little access. And so just want to shout out the local struggle here in DC, the Museum Square tenants who've been fighting in DC Chinatown. And I think some of them are watching here this morning. And they've been fighting for expiring Section 8 building in DC Chinatown. And the developer there wants to replace it with luxury condos and apartments. And that is the last population in DC Chinatown. So really want to shout that struggle out. We're seeing federal investments declining, being replaced by public-private investments, such as EB-5 and tax credits, such as the new market tax credits. And these are somewhat dependent and limited by investors, and also have some risk of increasing gentrification if they're not used well. If they're not used to benefit local communities. And so we really want to flag that and make sure that those investments are directed towards affordable housing, that they're directed towards existing residents, as Harriet mentioned. And that we can really do development without displacement. This is a concept that we believe is possible, that we can develop, we can improve our communities, and we can do it without displacing folks. We've seen that there's a lot of inequitable transit-oriented development happening right now, that land values are rising around transit and new federal light rail investments specifically. So we really want to work with the Department of Transportation to figure out how can we really incentivize affordable housing and make that real. And so we've heard from some great partners in Los Angeles who are doing great work around land use analysis to make sure that we can actually do that and have fair transit access. Next one. And then overall, this is an issue that's near and dear to my heart, but seeing really that there's very disconnected planning processes in most of our cities. And only a few cities we saw very engaged community planning, such as where HUD invested in the Twin Cities and Seattle. And Philadelphia has some great models for a democratic community process. And really what we're seeing is that this is one of the key strategies for anti-displacement. It's just that folks who are current residents are at the table in terms of community planning. And so the organizing is really critical. Next. So just want to share a little bit about our Neighborhoods Initiative. Our goal is really to advance local, state, and national policies for anti-displacement and equitable development in our neighborhoods. We have to work at all of those levels, and they have to work together, right? So just to give you a sense of what's coming up, we really want to develop more specific in detail toolkits, taking some of the strategies here and even adding some that weren't in the report, and really detailing out and giving policy samples and examples that folks can actually replicate in their cities. Federal advocacy, we met with congressional staff yesterday and are talking about doing some congressional delegations and hearings and really working with our advocates here on the Hill to move forward legislation. Movement building is absolutely critical. We know that Asian American Pacific Islander communities are not the only ones facing it. We know that other communities face different kinds of displacement and oftentimes more severe. So we really want to value our partnership with Right to the City and Homes for All. We're also working with the People and Places Collaborative to really address across communities what are the things that we can do to work together to prevent displacement. And then we have a very active working group, many of who are in this room today, who are basically sharing strategies across cities. And that's what we found is really the most useful thing for communities and neighborhoods to share across what's working and what's not. And lastly, I think the media visibility piece is really huge. We're basically in this report telling our stories. We're telling our stories of our neighborhoods. We're telling our individual stories that have not been told and definitely are not reflected in the media and often in the news. We're telling our community stories and we're telling our movement stories, really. We're telling how people, regular people, are taking power for themselves in the face of huge challenges, in the face of the power of capital to displace and building people power to really say that our neighborhoods matter. That this is not just about geography, this is about our families, this is about our cultures, and this is about our identity. So thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Lailan and Josh. So I want to bring up two of our member organizations and fellows who are here joining us today. Teresa Imperial from the Veterans Equity Center, and Sarah Young, here you can come here, from the Philadelphia Chinatown Development Corporation. I always get that one.
Thank you. I'm Teresa Imperial. I'm from the Veterans Equity Center. I'm the housing case manager and advocate for our housing program. Before I talked about the solution or the policy work that we've done in San Francisco, I kind of want to give the layout of why is there a hyper-gentrification going on in San Francisco. So in 2009, Twitter company threatened to leave San Francisco. And because of that, the mayor created this tax break. It became a Twitter tax break. And he also created a district called a mid-market district to incentivize tech companies to move in San Francisco and stay in San Francisco. So with that mid-market tax break, it created an event, and the real estate industry took advantage of that. So what that means is that the real estate industry are starting to do speculation. So with this new population coming in San Francisco, with high salaried employees, there are all of a sudden there is a lot of construction going on for luxurious rental catering for them. So that created a lot of speculation, a lot of evictions. And in San Francisco, especially in our community in South Market, there's a lot of rent-controlled housing stocks. All of a sudden, the rent-controlled housing stocks start being overturned, and we're seeing the spike in Ellis Act evictions. In 2014, San Francisco got, in 5 years, got the highest rates of the Ellis Act eviction and other no-fault evictions and other sham evictions. So because of that, our organization, together with other organizations in San Francisco, we saw that there's a lot of nuisance type of evictions where a family who are just having a baby stroll in their hallway, other tenants, or they are having other family members living with them, and start being a reason for eviction. So it doesn't give the tenants the right to cure. And also in our neighborhood as well, and mostly in San Francisco, especially in immigrant communities, English is not their first language. And so when these notifications are coming in, and a lot of those notifications are even not real notifications, like a court order will be something done by the lawyer, and it's just like a fake eviction pretty much. So we created Just Cause 2.0, where we're requiring these landlords to have language notifications in their native languages. so that these tenants will be able to understand as to what is going on, and also giving the right to cure. If, let's say, you just hang out, if you just hang your clothes outside the building, that it doesn't mean that you should be evicted for that you should be given time to cure for it. And also, if you want to add a roommate without maximizing the occupancy limits, it shouldn't be also a cause for eviction. Let's say if you are one person in a one bedroom and the maximum occupancy limit is for 3 people, you should be able to stay and add a roommate. So that's the policy of work that we did with the Just Cause 2.0. And this is this was passed last year, and this is helping our neighborhood, our community to pretty much stay in their community, just because the landlords are pretty much getting any reasons to just get rid of them. So it's really bad right now in San Francisco, but there's a lot of organizations are working against this hypergentrification.
Good morning, my name is Sarah Young. I'm the Director of Planning at Philadelphia Chinatown Development Corporation, PCDC. We are a community-based organization in Philadelphia Chinatown, and we are actually the oldest Asian CDC in the United States, and just celebrated our 50th birthday. Philadelphia Chinatown, to frame our neighborhood a little, is a historic immigrant gateway. It's a social, economic, and cultural hub, like many of our peer communities around the U.S. And we continue to offer unique opportunities for economic success for limited English proficient immigrants. We are located downtown, and although we're not in the peak of a gentrification crisis like other neighborhoods that we are hearing from today, we too have been impacted by the effects of gentrification and displacement. So our strategies around community engagement have been highlighted in the report that's released today. And we have a very long and proud history of community engagement in Philadelphia Chinatown. Going back to the urban renewal era, PCDC actually started as a response to a federal highway that is proposed to threaten the existence of our neighborhood. And we successfully voiced our value for the first time in this landscape where we were told that we had no value. We were able to take that victory and face down future projects that would come in the ensuing decades. This includes a commuter rail tunnel, 2 shopping malls, a state convention center, a federal prison, a baseball stadium, a casino, and I'm sure I forgot something. But all told, we lost about a quarter of our land with long-time residents and businesses, many of whom did not receive replacement housing. However, we successfully preserved our community. Today, we are a recognized community organization in the city, an RCO, and this is a formal mechanism which codified our role as advocates for the community in matters of zoning and development. So we have enforceable power to ensure that our residents are properly notified when there's a project that impacts them, and to ensure that that process is one that takes local opinion into account. This process opens up an avenue for us to advocate for these projects to meet comprehensive community needs and reflect our values in a way that improves the outcome for everybody. It also provides an opportunity for us to recruit, identify, and train future community advocates. Although Philadelphia is not often mentioned in the same breath as San Francisco, New York, or DC, we too have begun to suffer the same impacts from displacement and gentrification. We see that affordability is the greatest threat to the viability of our neighborhood. As we adapt to this new mindset from urban renewal to facing gentrification, we're learning that the real damage of gentrification in ethnic neighborhoods does not start when the neighborhood is already facing a crisis of displacement. It starts when a community starts to see its identity slowly transform from a place of opportunity to a closed door for new residents. And it also starts with a flight of low and moderate income populations who have the wherewithal to withdraw from our community to more affordable opportunities outside. And the resulting income spectrum is bifurcated into the poorest and wealthiest folks. It creates a situation where organizations like PCDC have to struggle in an uphill battle to preserve these opportunities for the most vulnerable populations in our communities. So Philadelphia and PCDC look to our peer cities, and we feel very sober, but we also feel very hopeful, because for us, this is an opportunity to preserve a place of opportunity, which has retained this rich history of place-based struggle and self-determination. And we can see from our brothers and sisters in the field that the time to act is now. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, sorry, it's a little awkward coming in out of camera, but I want to bring up Lahela Williams from Hawaiian Community Assets in Honolulu and Duncan Wong from Apano in Oregon.
Aloha. Hi, everyone. How are you? Let's bring up the energy. We are here talking about amazing strategies utilized across the country by awesome people. So let's do this with a cheerful heart. It is such an honor for me to be here with each and every one of you in the room and on the web. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, my name is Lahela Williams. I'm a program director with Hawaiian Community Assets. We are a HUD-approved housing counseling agency with a mission to build the capacity of low and moderate income communities across the state of Hawaii. And as a member of both the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement and National Capacity, it is definitely an honor to be here and sharing our opportunities and our strategies in the report. Okay, now I say that because it's not an easy thing to talk about. In Hawaii, we saw a 678% increase in foreclosures from 2008 to 2012. And as you can imagine, Hawaii being the only island state presenting its beautiful opportunities and extremely unique challenges, coupled with cost of living and displacement. We have a compounded issue that needs to be highlighted. We're going to hold it in. We're not going to do that today. Mortgage delinquency within the state kind of stabilized at 1.57%. And simultaneously, we saw mortgage delinquency rates on Native Hawaiian homelands skyrocket to 14.5%. That represented, on any given day, 800 Native Hawaiian families at risk of losing their homes. And $47 million worth of home equity that's just in the air. You can only do what you can do. And so as a HUD-approved housing counseling agency, we did what we knew best. We adopted housing counseling practices, and then we made them culturally relevant, because all people are different and all people are unique, and communities of color have a special need. And if we as an agency don't know how to meet them where their needs are, we're not truly doing them any justice. And so we took the traditional homeowner program counseling. You meet with the family, you do the budget, you do their credit, and that ABC round. And we kind of flipped it on its head. We took our outreach efforts into the communities, onto the Hawaiian homesteads. We brought mortgage assistance fairs to the families and to the communities where they needed it the most, where they trusted their neighbors, where they were open to having you come into their space to share with them and to educate them about the free services that were available and about the actual genuine loss mitigation options that were offered to them. At this point, they're being misled because we don't have the same loss mitigation options everyone else does. And so you had tons of families being led astray. And so we did a really robust outreach effort. We went into communities, we met them where the need was. And once we did that, we started to do our housing counseling spiel. We work with the families one-on-one to do their budget, to do their credit, to really look at what their affordability was. Then we offered them asset building programs, asset building products and loans, match savings accounts to help cure delinquencies, to help them rebuild their credit, to help get them back on their feet. Once we got the family to the place where they were okay and they were starting to become more pono, we went to the lenders. And we started to negotiate on behalf of our families. We were able to secure loss mitigation options that made sense because we could speak the language. When you're working with families, they get so caught up and they get so entrenched in I'm going to lose my house, nothing else matters. And so we took it upon ourselves to do third-party underwriting and working with our families. And I am so, so proud to say that since 2012, we've had 314 families come through our foreclosure prevention program. We've had 78 loan modifications done in that time, and we've helped to preserve $4.1 million worth of home equity. And so that is just one of the programs that we offer at Hawaiian Community Assets, alongside culturally relevant education and asset building products that are innovative in nature. Please visit our website, hawaiiancommunity.net, for more information, and thank you so very much.
Thank you. Wow, such a tough act to follow. Good morning, everyone. My name is Duncan Huang. I'm the Associate Director at APANO, the Asian Pacific American Network of Oregon. We're based in Portland. So just to set the stage, we're really active in the Jade District. It's centered around one of the most diverse census tracts in Oregon. It's a low and moderate income. And there's some things that are a little different about our neighborhood than some of the neighborhoods you've heard about before. We're not a historic Chinatown. We actually have a historic Chinatown downtown that basically disappeared. There's about 12 Chinese people that actually live in Chinatown now. Everyone else has moved out to East Portland, where we operate. So we're not a historic enclave. We're just a really diverse neighborhood, high concentration of APIs. And we're not downtown, so we lack a lot of basic infrastructure, like sidewalks and parks. So in terms of the spectrum, we're kind of in that pre-gentrification phase. We really see ourselves as kind of at the border of Portlandia and the rest of Portland. You might have seen Portlandia with like, $10 coffees and sandwiches and things like that. We're not quite there yet. We're on that border, but we're really starting to see the pressures rise just from growth in the city. We have a big tech sector, from redlining and historic underinvestment. So these are all kind of pressures that are on our neighborhood now. So we want to get ahead of this gentrification and displacement phenomenon. So what we really see is that this displacement issue is a really complex issue. There's no one silver bullet that can really address this problem. And what we really need are city, statewide, and regional solutions. And that's really kind of informed our strategy going forward. So we've really taken advantage of a lot of the opportunities presented to us at the citywide level. Every 10, 15 years or so, the city opens up a comprehensive plan for public comment. So APANO and about 20 other groups kind of developed an 11-point comprehensive plan strategy, and we got most of that adopted in the new comp plan, which is a big win. It calls for things like 10,000 new units of affordable housing, land banking, zoning changes, really technical things like reconstruction overlay zones. These are all things that are in our toolbox to prevent displacement. Our city also recently called for a housing state of emergency and dedicated $30 million to extra affordable housing and rental protection. So those are things that we've kind of been working on at the citywide level. On the statewide level, a bunch of advocates, including APANO, won the lifting of a constitutional ban on inclusionary zoning at the statewide level. Oregon and Texas were the only two states that had this ban on inclusionary zoning. So that's been lifted to give us another tool in our toolbox. And regionally, we're working on a bus rapid transit route that connects Portland with some of our eastern suburbs. So we've really been active in creating the Portland Action Plan that has a lot of great displacement or anti-displacement strategies in that plan. So it's a multi-level, multi-tiered approach. And, I think we've won a lot of things at the planning phase, and now the details are really in the implementation. So like just because a ban was lifted on inclusionary zoning doesn't mean that we have inclusionary zoning. I mean, we have to craft that policy. Just because the comp plan now calls for 10,000 units of affordable housing, it's just in the plan. We have to get those funded, we have to get those built. So, we really believe that city budgets and municipal budgets are moral documents, and we got to put our money where our mouth is, and that's what we're working on advocating for now. So they're in the plan, and we get them done. I have 2 minutes left, and I'm going to cede my time and get us back on track. Thank you very much.
So as you can hear, there's really amazing work happening on the ground, and I think the policy recommendations that we're going to present next really try to lift up those local models and regional models that are already in existence, and what are the things that agencies like HUD, DOT, and others can do to help facilitate some of this work that is happening and support those efforts, but also move more proactively and align city, state, and federal initiatives. So these recommendations are our starting point. To present them, we have Ching Chen from SCIPTA, the Seattle Chinatown International District Preservation and Development Authority in Seattle, Washington. Angie Liu from ACDC, Asian Community Development Corporation in Boston, and Robin Danner from CNHA.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ching Chan, and I'm with the Seattle Chinatown International District PDA. I am the Design Lab Coordinator at the Idea Space Program, which is a community development resource center. And I have with me today some recommendations that are provided in this report, and I'm just going to share a few of them. The first one is really focused on the federal hot markets program. There are, as mentioned by earlier speakers, that there are a lot of hot markets. A lot of our API communities are located in these hot markets, and in our numerous discussions with a lot of our partners and organizations across the nation, we realize that we recognize that there is a spectrum of hot markets, and on the one end you have places like San Francisco, LA, New York, Honolulu, and then on the other end you have Portland, and Seattle is somewhere in between, actually probably closer to the hotter side, unfortunately. And so although we have local policies that address some of these issues, we really need to look at it as a whole, and on a national level. How do we address some of these problems that are really, really hot, but then also at the same time start planning ahead for some of these lukewarm or warmer markets that are, so that we can take more of a preventative cost. And so one of the recommendations that was provided is to create cultural districts. So like in San Francisco's Chinatown, where you have a designated cultural district, it actually provides protections to a lot of our small businesses, mom and pop shops, because they make up a lot of the character of our neighborhoods. They're also kind of the bread and butter of our communities. And then we also want to, in that line, we want to make sure that we stabilize the commercial rent for a lot of our small businesses, and also tenants, residential tenants. Airbnb is a big one in some of our hotter markets, like San Francisco and LA, where San Francisco has over 4,000 Airbnb units, and LA has over 7,000, which is very, very alarming. We want to ensure that there is federal policies to protect a lot of these livable units that could be used for long-term residents as opposed to renting out to short-term renters. We also want to ensure that at least 50 to 100% of affordable public land be used towards building and developing affordable housing of various sorts, and really push for a lot of we want to push for fair access for families to be able to stay in a lot of our communities so that they don't get pushed out to a lot of our suburbs. Recently, a lot of our affordable housing, whether it's affordable or not affordable, market rate housing that are being developed in these downtown areas are mostly one-bedroom studios, 2 bedrooms at most, but those are far and few in between. And we want to ensure that in order for our families to continue to survive in our communities, that we need to provide 3-bedroom housing, 4-bedroom housing, more housing options for our families to be able to stay within the city, so that our schools don't close down and we have more vibrant and diverse communities close to downtown and close to where services are. And last but not least, we want to ensure that we address predatory equity, ensure that we have policies to address that. And then I just want to go over a little bit about providing guidance for equitable transit-oriented development. I think a couple of folks talked about this, both in LA and in Portland. There are a lot of transportation, rails and rapid ride systems that are being planned, underway, probably in construction phase already. And as we think about that, it's a really great idea to connect neighborhoods and communities to downtowns and other areas, airports, what have you. But as we plan for those, we also need to think about historically how our neighborhoods, a lot of our neighborhoods of color, have been affected and negatively impacted by these transit development. We really need to keep our communities in mind we do. But the city and the national government needs to keep us in mind in terms of putting light rails and bus lines and highways that cuts through our neighborhoods. And so we really want to push for a requirement of land use analysis to really look at where the needs are and the impact that these plans have, these transit lines have on our communities. We want to also ensure that we have a baseline of affordable housing as well as mitigation. Of course, mitigation is always the last step, but we in the past we know that that is also a very important piece that we need to include just to be safe.
So I'm Angie Liu. I'm from the Asian Community Development Corporation in Boston. We are based in Boston's Chinatown, which has experienced a very long history of displacement, both during the urban renewal era in the 50s and 60s to today, when we're experiencing tremendous pressure of gentrification. Our community has also come a long way through trials and error, learning how to organize ourselves, but also to lead our own community planning and engagement processes. So this is the area strategy that I want to talk about in meaningful community planning and engagement practices. So what we've learned over the years in Boston's Chinatown is that having a very active community planning process, especially one that's community driven and led, is absolutely critical to shaping the outcomes. If you leave that planning to somebody else, however well-meaning they are, they're not going to meet your community's needs. So a brief example is when a piece of land called Parcel 24 was becoming available as part of Boston's Big Dig project about 12 years ago, the community on our own organized a very intensive and long planning process to decide what types of uses we want to see, what types of housing. We want to have affordable rentals and home ownership, open space for kids to play in, community spaces, and eventually those community demands eventually got incorporated into the project. We're now going through a similar process for another parcel of land. So the first recommendation that's included in the report is whenever there are publicly funded projects, we want to make sure that there's a certain amount of funding set aside, at least 10%. That's reserved for linguistically and culturally appropriate engagement process. And to require the local governments to reach out and partner with community-based organizations who usually are the ones who best know how to reach out to our own communities. So, for example, we will do door knocking, flyering in bakeries and grocery stores, whole meetings at convenient times for people who often have to work 2 jobs, and provide childcare and interpreters. The second recommendation is to make sure that there is effective notification of meetings and participation to ensure that there's actually a meaningful feedback mechanism when the community provides impact instead of just having an empty formality of the community providing input and not knowing whether those comments are actually being incorporated. The third one is something called an impact scorecard. So how I think about it is similar to a lot of projects are required to do an environmental impact assessment. Think of it as another type of assessment or scorecard that assesses the potential impact of a project on the socio-economic factors for our vulnerable communities. So the scorecards can then help inform and shape community benefit agreements that will address a lot of these areas that affect our neighborhoods, such as job trainings and economic development, local hiring goals, providing living wage jobs, and affordability. And by that, we don't just mean having affordable housing, but as well as affordable goods and services that actually serve the community that's already there. Small business mitigation, that means providing small retail spaces that have affordable rents, preferences for independent businesses over large chains that can pay the highest rent, and also requiring local governments to create anti-displacement plans as part of their project review.
Hello again, aloha, Robin Danner. The three of us really in this segment of the webcast is to just identify a handful of policy recommendations. But I think that if you look at the report, it is robust and full of awesome recommendations. For those in Hawaii, either any one of the policy recommendations that my colleagues just outlined, you might know them under different terminology, such as consultation, et cetera. So Boston CDC, or whether it's happening in LA, whether it's happening in Honolulu, from our perspective, all of these policy recommendations are relevant no matter where you are located. So I've just been asked to highlight and touch on a few on land equity for Native Hawaiians. One of the policy recommendations in our joint report is to publish a final rule on self-governance and self-determination policy under the federal government that is available to the 3 Native groups that pre-existed the United States government. So we have roughly 80% of Native Hawaiians, our homelands, we have been displaced from. More like 85%. We hold maybe 4% of our land base. So I love that we have such talented young people and organizations in this report. They're all relevant to us. It might go back 50 years. For us, sometimes we get a little hot-headed because it goes back like 2,000 years. So forgive. The second is, one of our policy recommendations is for the federal government to improve its oversight of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. The federal government is a legal, formal trustee to Native Hawaiians as they are to American Indians and Alaska Natives. And I'm really happy and want to congratulate officials from the Obama administration that indeed yesterday, the first time in 100 years, the federal government adopted final rules, regulations for the first time on a 100-year-old law, finally. Sometimes it takes a little longer, final rules on regulations over the state of Hawaii. So the next generation of Hawaiians will be working with for the next several years to do many, many more federal rules. We need reauthorization of the Native American Housing and Self-Determination Act for our land trust areas. Lahela spoke to you earlier about the high delinquency and foreclosure rate of Native Hawaiian families. That's not because they are more challenged economically than non-Hawaiians in the state. It's because their trust lands, check this, FHA and the state of Hawaii government actually implemented an illegal policy that limits Lahela's clients, Native Hawaiians, from accessing their own equity at the same levels of all other Americans. This is a policy issue we have been struggling with under the FHA program in the state of Hawaii for at least 9 years. So there's a reason for the sources of challenges that Lahela has. One of the things that could happen is to reauthorize NAHASDA, which would give the loan guarantee capacity that her nonprofit needs to help families. We'd like to see access to Native American CDFI grant awards in the U.S. Treasury program. We think this as one of the highlights of bringing capital into our communities. Sometimes we take that for granted everywhere else in America. But when you're on a trust land location, a community land trust or et cetera, you've got to make sure that walls don't go up on access to capital as a result of that special land status. It doesn't need to be, and most of it is just ignorance. And then finally, we'd like to, I mentioned earlier, we'd like to get a MOU to reverse the loan to value and refinance limitations put on only Native Hawaiians, Native Hawaiian borrowers, which has created a very uphill climb for Lahela and families. And as everyone here knows, when our families are displaced, when they're under stress from foreclosure attempts or the inability to find housing, it affects our kids' education. It affects domestic issues within the household. It affects everything about it. The home is the foundation of our well-being. Was there anything else, Lailan, that you wanted to say? So, COFA, my favorite, the Micronesia and the larger Pacific area. As a Native Hawaiian, I'm also a Pacific Islander, and Native Hawaiians take very serious our responsibility to other Pacific Islanders in the larger Pacific, which we like to call the Blue Continent. Climate change is a serious, serious problem, and our report highlights that that we know that sea levels are rising. They only have to rise an inch to wipe out an island nation out in the Pacific, and then you're going to have climate refugees. So we know that not just as Americans, whether we're on the continent or out in the Pacific, we have a responsibility to the larger Pacific. So some of our suggestions are, we'd like to see $1 million, which is not a lot of capital, redirected by the federal government annually to climate change organizing out in the Pacific, out in Micronesia, out to American Samoa, our territory, a U.S. territory, and to Guam, so that they can start organizing and getting themselves together, because it's not if, it's when these issues of climate change impact those places. And lastly, we want to, what's in this report is to lay out the development of climate change credits to help mitigate homelessness and fund family services that are needed now, but are going to be in crisis levels in the Pacific region, and not a lot of land mass to create a lot of solutions. So we'd like to start now. But in closing, I'd just like to say that these are just a handful of amazing policy recommendations made by hundreds of organizations that, from us as a co-host and co-sponsor of the report, it was easy to put the report together. What was hard is people like our partners and our members on the ground that are doing the work every day. And so we really want to thank you folks and all of the folks here and out there in the webcast. Keep doing what you're doing. Fight the good fight.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you everyone for taking the time to listen to the stories and the recommendations. The report is very rich and has a lot of, as you can hear, a lot of diversity in terms of the issues we're trying to address. So before we open it up to everyone in the room and on the webcast, we asked a few of our partners to first give some initial responses to the report. First, we'll have Tony Romano from Right to the City. As I said earlier, we spent a lot of yesterday on the Hill talking about a lot of these issues. So we wanted to give them a chance to give Tony a chance to share his thoughts after our 2 days together. Sabrina Terry with NCLR, National Council of La Raza. She works with National Capacity more on the asset building side and addressing sort of the racial wealth gap issues. So looking forward to hearing your thoughts. And then, of course, Paul Keeley with the National Low Income Housing Coalition, our host today, but also one of our core partners in our work in this field. So please, Tony, why don't you start?
Okay, thank you. Good morning. I'm Tony Romano with Right to the City and Homes for All. For those who aren't familiar, Homes for All is a national campaign that's seeking solutions to the problems of displacement and rising rents. We have 52 organizations, community-based, resident-led in 30 cities and 20 states. So for us, in reading the report, one is just a real breath of fresh air. Mm-hmm. Every aspect of the report, every sentence, everything we read, we find the common threads of community, land, and housing being human rights and being something that we really have a right to. So that really resonates with us at Homes for All. Our groups are very excited because they thrive by learning from each other and supporting each other. So our groups on the ground are reading the report and learning and benefiting from it, and look forward to ongoing dialogue with all the groups that put that report together. The other thing is we do feel it's critical, as has been said, that this report lifts up the issue of displacement, which we feel is a critical issue of the day, an issue that you won't hear presidential candidates talk about. And unfortunately, you don't hear a lot of elected officials and government folks talking about. But the reality we know is if you knock on any door in any community, if you go into any barbershop, if you go into any restaurant and ask people what's going on, what concerns them, housing and community is going to be one or two that comes up. So we know it's a fundamental issue in our communities and one we need to deal with. The other thing we find that's very, very important about this report is this report puts race front and center in the discussion of housing and displacement. We think this is very critical. From our perspective at Right to the City and Homes for All, racism from the beginning of this country has shaped housing policy and continues to shape housing policy today. So the policies that exist are not race blind. So if we're going to talk about solutions, we cannot be race blind. So we need solutions that address what's fundamentally impacting communities of color, which is questions of displacement, rising rents, and stability. So we really appreciate that. The next thing is this report debunks one of what we feel is one of the fundamental myths of our day, which is that gentrification is inevitable. This is how development happens. There is no other way. So you can try to mitigate it, do what you can. We don't believe that, and we agree with National Capacity that gentrification is not inevitable. And actually, there is another way. And first and foremost, this report is saying there is another way, and the folks who can show us that other way are the impacted residents. That's where we can look to find solutions, and that's who we need to follow. And we found that to be very true. Second, in any solution you see in this report, fundamentally, there's a different thing that's driving development. Right now, what's driving development is one fundamental aspect: maximizing profit. That is what drives development in our country. That's what drives development in our communities. And that's why displacement, rising rents are happening, because it's great. If your goal is to maximize profit, that's great. That goal does not value roots, history, connections to a community, being close to your job, church, mosque, etc. So what we feel this report does is say there must be a fundamental break from maximizing profit being the driving force of development. That break must put the needs of the community and families first. That's what must drive development. And if profit's going to be involved, it must be involved in relation to that aspect. Finally, we would say that the timing of this report could not be more important. Literally, you've heard stories today, and our community groups know that many communities of color have been destroyed time and time again, and have been destroyed now. You heard stories of no one's left in Chinatown, some Chinatowns except 12 people. Today, we realize we're at a juncture where what we do today is going to impact whether we have majority communities of color, majority cities of color. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. What we do today will impact whether Atlanta remains a black city or becomes a white, wealthier city. So this report is showing us the path forward. We can either repeat history and continue to destroy communities of color, displace people, disrupt families, or we can forge a new path, which this report puts forward. A path where we develop that does in a way that doesn't displace, that puts families and communities first, and has those families, number one, having a right to remain in their communities, a right to shape any development that happens, and a right to benefit from that development.
Thank you. Sabrina. Great. Hi, my name is Sabrina Terry. I am a project manager of the Wealth Building Initiative at the National Council of La Raza. For those of you who are not familiar with National Council of La Raza, that also goes by NCLR, we are the nation's largest civil rights, Latino civil rights and advocacy organization in the country. We serve Latino communities across the nation through our network of nearly 300 community service organizations, most of which are direct service providers to the community. About a third of our organizations are financial service providers. A little over 50 of them are, I guess, a part of NCLR's housing counseling network and provide direct services in terms of housing counseling and other group education services. So I'd like to start by thanking National Capacity and CNHA for inviting me to be an initial respondent on this very insightful and motivating report, a report whose the issues, challenges in the report may have happened in another community, but really mirror the same issues that we see in the Latino community, whose policy recommendations and community organizing tactics can definitely apply to other communities of color, including the Latino community. The skyrocketing cost of living, homelessness, the competition for development rights impacts Latino communities just like it impacts AAPI communities. Our neighborhoods that were once redlined, abandoned, fled, and lacked investment for years are now these highly coveted pockets, right? But the people who lived there, who made it their homes, who stuck around, and who supported one another through all that time are now struggling to hold on to that community. They've been plagued by unemployment and underemployment, stagnant wages, criminalization. They lost a lot of their wealth as a result of the Great Recession. And so it's difficult right now to hold on to places like Sunset Park, Brooklyn, and Boyle Heights, LA, and even growing cities like Austin, Texas. So And like the AAPI community, Latino communities have significant foreign-born population that relies on the supportive networks and resources that are in these historic enclaves. And so as those resources disaggregate, it only makes it more difficult for those immigrants to come and integrate into society successfully. The Latino community is also a young community, so the affordability and accessibility are critical to the health and economic prosperity of those new families. And so their ability to access safe and affordable housing and also those resources directly impacts their ability to build assets and secure intergenerational wealth. Latinos also have longer life expectancy than a lot of other racial and ethnic groups. So meaning we have elders in our community who are living a lot longer. They're relying on their fixed income a lot longer. And so affordable housing that's near their resources, near their hospitals and things of that nature are critical to them as they're in their retirement. And, you know, the community institutions that I mentioned that have stuck around and have formed to really support these communities, I'm talking about the churches, the businesses, and even the social service providers are also threatened because, you know, their constituency that they're serving is now disaggregating. They're moving away. It's making it harder for them to reach that clientele, to reach their congregation, to reach their patrons. So they're also hard hit by this affordability challenge. It's not just a housing thing. It's also a commercial property and retail property issue. But what I like most about this report is that it does a great job of chronicling the land use policies and the tax policies that favor developers and favor corporate interest. But more so, I really like the way that it highlights how communities have come together to take on those corporate interests and how they have developed best practices and they're sharing their lessons learned. And so what I really took away from the report is that the success and progress took place when investments and advocacy efforts were really championed by people on the ground, community leaders, leaders who were able to engage their community in urban planning efforts and negotiating, you know, community benefits agreements, leaders who knew where the gaps in services were and were able to advocate for more holistic policies, more wraparound services, and, you know, similarly, almost every example was focused on empowering community members to help each other. So whether it was assisting the community in developing, you know, accessory dwelling units or campaigning or participating in some type of community planning process, it really focused on strengthening the bonds within the community and really whether that's between community members, with the institutions that are there, with the government agencies, it really created this network, a supportive network there to champion not only the issues that we see right now, but the issues that are forthcoming, that are unforeseen. So I would like to just say, you know, thank you again. The strategies and lessons learned are things that we need, a part of this larger movement, a part of these issues that we see that cross multiple communities of color, and that they only further highlight our need to work together on the national, state, and local levels to really address these policies and these practices head on because they don't have geographic boundaries. Thank you.
So thank you. I'm, again, Paul Keeley, the Chief Operating Officer at the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and I just want to concur with my two colleagues here. Number one, phenomenal report. You know, congratulations to National Capacity and to CNHA for just an outstanding report. I really agree with both my colleagues that the solutions that were proposed that really focus on community engagement, that address issues of race. This is about social justice. It's something very near and dear to our hearts at NLIC. I took copious notes of the tremendous strategies that the report laid out in all of the local, you know, municipal-wide, neighborhood level, and in some cases statewide. And I won't go over the ones that I found most compelling because of time, but I will just say a couple of things about the national policy because that's what NLIC focuses on. I want to bring it up to the national level. Actually, first on the local level, let me just say one thing. we at NLIC feel really strongly that when we talk about affordable housing, which was so much part of so many of the strategies, right? In I would say, a dozen of the strategies that were laid out, it talked about preserving or increasing affordable housing. We will always make the argument that we need to make that affordable housing truly affordable and deeply targeted. We need to get to the lowest levels of affordability that we can. And there's a main reason for that. Every year, the National Low Income Housing Coalition puts out something called the gap analysis. And it shows both at the national level and in major metropolitan areas what the gap is for different income groups in terms of units that exist. And you won't be surprised that in the major metropolitan areas, which are the ones that has the biggest gap in terms of the number of extremely low income or low income folks and the affordable units that are available, they're the locations that have been identified in this report. And what this will show, please take a look at it, is that what happens makes complete sense. If I'm a low income person or I'm a moderate income person and I can get a unit that's affordable for an extremely low income person, I'll take it. I'd do it. Paul Keeley would do it if I could do it. Gee, that's a great unit for me. It's cheap. I like the location or whatever. I'm going to take it. So the problem is that even there's an absolute shortage of 7.2 million units for extremely low income people. These are people making 30% or less of area median income. So think about the woman who's cleaning these offices at night and has 2 kids at home, and she's making $10 an hour. She's trying to find a place that doesn't exist. Generally in DC, it does not exist. She's got to make $25 an hour to afford a 2-bedroom place for her and her kids in DC. At $10 just isn't going to cut it. What happens then is people at higher levels will take some of the units that are available for extremely low income. So what we're going to argue is, even with the local solutions, deeply targeted, if we can provide units at the lowest level, guess what? That frees up units at the higher levels. So that would be one takeaway. The other thing is, at the national policies, agree with virtually all of the policies that were laid out. It's mentioned, decrease in federal investments into affordable housing. Generally, we would just encourage everybody at the local level, get involved in advocating at the national level. So the report does say, let's make sure that the AFFH rule has guidance about how to deal with AFFH, affirmatively furthering fair housing in hot markets. We completely support that. Increasing revenue for the National Housing Trust Fund. It's a great new thing, but it's got way too little money. We've got to invest more in things like the National Housing Trust Fund. Section 8 stabilization program, increasing vouchers in hot market cities, protecting tenants' right to remain. All those things happen at the national level. We've got to have a voice at the national level to change those kind of issues. The other thing I just want to point out really quickly, my time is almost up. The report mentions that from 2000 to 2014, rents have been rising twice as fast as incomes. Twice as fast. Home values 3 times as fast. And that there are 22 million more renters in metro areas from 2006 to 2014. One thing I want to say about those rising rents and those rising home values, we have a policy, a national policy in the United States that virtually intentionally, everybody knows it does, drives up real estate values. And that really influenced hot markets, the really expensive cities. It's called the mortgage interest deduction. It generally benefits the wealthy. And what it does is it encourages people to buy more and more expensive homes and for people to be able to sell more and more expensive homes. And the people we all care most about can't get it, generally, because they don't make enough to itemize the taxes. If we would reduce the cap from $1 million. That's what it is now. We have this housing subsidy for rich people. It goes up to $1 million, a mortgage up to $1 million. If we lowered that amount to $500,000 and we converted it to a tax credit, it would benefit 10 million, more than 10 million additional homeowners who are low and moderate income homeowners, because it's a tax credit. They would get it. They don't have to itemize in their taxes. And we would save $200 billion over 10 years that could be invested in affordable housing in these markets for extremely low income folks. So that's my final word on that. This is a great report. Again, congratulations to its authors. It's extremely well done, incredibly important. So thank you very much.
Okay, so we're going to move to open forum. I know we have some members of the media with us online as well as in the room and others. So you can submit questions via the webcast or on the hashtag Our Neighborhoods. If your question is for a specific person, please indicate so. And I'll ask Lailan and Robin maybe to hang around the front in case questions come specifically about the report itself. So, yeah, let me just open it up. Is there anyone in the room who wants to start, maybe? Any questions or comments about the report? No? Do we have questions online?
Yes.
Okay. Get us settled here. We were excited to, okay, first question in. For the rest of you, please feel free. So, will there be national coordinated public actions to further increase public awareness of this displacement epidemic? So, I mean, we could talk about the campaign, the Homes for All campaign, and then maybe, Lailan, you can also talk about what our plans are. Tony?
Yeah, so that's a really important question because this report is a huge step forward in terms of the dialogue with communities and coming up with what solutions could work. We understand the reality of actually getting those solutions to be implemented is going to require a housing justice movement and people coming together. The good news is that we haven't talked much about is that impacted residents in our communities, whether API communities or the Black, Latino, working class communities that make up Homes for All partners, impacted residents are coming together in record numbers saying, this can't continue. I can't live this way. I don't want my children and my grandchildren to have to go through this. We cannot live where we're uprooted from our communities we've been in for decades and where we're paying 50, 60, 70% of our income to housing and having to forego prescriptions, having to forego sending our kids to college, etc. So people are coming together. They're joining existing housing groups like members of Homes for All and members of National Capacity, and they're even forming their own groups, new housing justice groups, tenant associations that are advocating for these policies locally, regionally, and nationally. So a lot of exciting stuff that's happening on the ground in terms of campaigns, which include direct actions, movements. We're talking about later this year having a Renter Day of Action, where renters and low-income homeowners all over the country on one common day stand up and take action to advocate for policies like this. So we would encourage anyone listening to this to, if you believe in this, join one of our organizations, get involved in the fight so we can add the public pressure that's necessary to actually make these policies a reality. So you can go to www.homesforall.org or certainly join National Capacity. Thank you. Yes, and one great example of something that's happening right now is one of our members in Rochester, New York, Miss Liz McGriff, who was kicked out of her longtime home, her and her family, because the banks with an FHA loan would not modify her loan. She lost her job and then got a new job, and they refused to negotiate with her. So they kicked her out of her house. Miss Liz is representative of thousands and thousands of people that are saying, I can't take it anymore. Last week, Miss McGriff and her son opened up the doors to her house that was taken from her, and she's retaken her house. Her and her son are living in that house and are demanding from HUD to turn her house over to a local community land trust so the community and residents in Rochester who collectively own the land will control that house, and that her and her son continue to live there. So if you go to our website, you can sign the petition and support Miss Liz. That's one example of actions that are happening all over the country. We need more and more people to stand up, take back what's ours, and win these policies that we need desperately.
I agree wholeheartedly with Tony, and then there's two initiatives I'll mention that we're doing to coordinate public actions. One is in 2016, the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement is launching the Hawaiian Week in DC. I know for those of you back home, that's a scary thought that there's going to be that many Hawaiians in DC, but it's very important that our Pacific Islanders that are most geographically farthest away from the center of power, our capital, that we become advocates and that we learn the systems and the processes here in our nation's capital of moving good policies forward, along with joining. We can't do anything alone. We have to join other organizations. And then the second strategy that I'll mention is we just launched a 5-year Vote to Rise campaign. We need to stop being hila, shy or uncomfortable about talking about the power of our vote. And so a 5-year voter registration and voter education campaign, we're teaching ourselves how to do phone banking and how to do all of using technology to reach not just Native Hawaiian voters, but AAPI voters everywhere that we have member organizations in the United States. So I would encourage organizations, nonpartisan, Vote to Rise campaigns to start stepping up, because now we have our message, we have our report, and now we need to make sure that policy makers are elected that read the report and then attempt to implement.
Yeah, I just wanted to address a little bit, I think the role of organizing in this work, I think is absolutely critical, and that's why we're partnering with the Homes for All campaign. Many of these members were the ones who, during the foreclosure crisis, took back their homes and occupied their homes and said that these are our homes. We've lived here for 30, 40 years, generations in many cases, and you can't just throw us out of our homes. It's just morally unacceptable, and that housing is a human right. So I think organizing has often shifted the conversation and shifted what's really possible in terms of policy. Often the policymakers or the lawyers will tell us that it's not possible or that it's not legal. And I think that organizing actually changes the entire realm of what is possible, as we've seen in the overturn of the ban on inclusionary zoning. We're seeing everyone reconsider rent control after generations and decades, and looking at just cause eviction policies across the country is really challenging basic principles and ideas and notions about capitalism and about community and about home here in this country, and struggles over land and power. And so I just want to say that it's really critical that many of our members are engaging and organizing public actions. And I think, the eviction defense work, I think going to our city council meetings and demanding inclusionary housing, all of this work is happening, putting our bodies on the line on developments that are not serving our communities, that will destroy our neighborhoods, is absolutely critical. And we're going to be working together with our members to coordinate these joint campaigns. And wanted to just talk a little bit about some of the activities that we have planned with our working group. A lot of that does include federal advocacy, and so we will be sending out action alerts. We will be moving forward an equitable transit-oriented development advocacy platform on the Hill. And we will be asking folks to send in letters to the Department of Transportation to be at the table with us as we work together with the administration to move forward equitable policies and roll out their programs as well, and make sure that they actually get to Asian American Pacific Islander communities, because often we are left out of those federal programs. Talking about advocacy for this federal hot markets program, we're definitely going to be working with Congress, doing congressional delegations to our neighborhoods, also doing field hearings in our neighborhoods so that Congress can hear directly from folks who are affected by displacement. And we will be asking you to come to those hearings, to come to the delegations, be part of the conversation, and raise this issue to the national level. And then we are going to be doing some trans-local campaigns with some of our members and actually pushing for things like community planning institutes. We have a great model in Philadelphia, actually, of a real community planning institute where the city invests in training neighborhood leaders on how to engage development in ways that advocates for residents' needs. And so we're going to be asking some of our members to lead campaigns in their cities to actually institute that so that we have a say in how our cities are shaped. So we will be asking folks to get involved in those kinds of actions.
I think there's one overall strategy that we should share that we're working on together, that we're going to spend the next probably year working on, is to have NHPI organizations like CNHA and AAPI organizations like Capacity. We're going to start actually drafting anti-displacement legislation. It may not be introduced right away or at an opportune time for us, but we want to be in a position to have anti-displacement legislation written, vetted with our membership, ready to go when the opportunity in the Senate or the House is available. We will not be caught off guard. We will be empowered with legislation from the people, by the people, for the people.
And one more thing I would say about the relationship between fighting for these policies and what's happening to you at home is we understand fighting for and winning these policies is not going to happen tomorrow. So our philosophy at Homes for All, and I know we share it with National Capacity, is that we fight today for each of our community members what their needs are. So if someone is being evicted today, they and their neighbors must get together and stop that eviction, and we can support that. So we must strive to fight every day to stop any unjust eviction, any unjust foreclosure, any unjust displacement. We right now have tenants coming together. They're fighting for rent control in their city because that won't happen tomorrow. They're forming tenant unions and going to their landlord, which they're pushing to sign a contract that guarantees rent control and just cause eviction today. So we must fight for solutions today and fight for the longer term policies to be in place. But we want people to know you don't have to wait. You can get involved now, and we can support you in your immediate fight that's tied to these longer term policy wins.
Great. Well, it seems like that's a really great place to close, with these actions in mind and our exciting plans ahead. So thank you, everybody, for joining us, and looking forward to continuing the conversation online. Please stay in touch with us through the hashtag Our Neighborhoods, and for those of us who are within our membership or partners and allies, please do consider joining our work. This is just the beginning, and we're looking forward to really moving forward with these campaigns. So thank you, everyone, for joining.
And the report will be available later today online for everybody to download and share. Thank you all.